Mr. Daniel Richardson went to his country house that day to harvest his vegetable garden. He couldn't even imagine that someone would try to steal into his humble apartment. Daniel was only away for 8 hours, but when he returned, he couldn't believe his eyes. Everything was upside down. Obviously, someone was looking for jewelry, but what made thieves think that a poor pensioner could have jewelry? So the thieves took what could be sold, at least for a small amount of money. When the police arrived, they found Daniel at his desk. He was holding an empty box and grieving. They stole absolutely everything from me. They saw that I have a very modest apartment and I'm not rich. It's such a despicable thing to do. The policeman approached him and asked, "Have you checked everything? Maybe they stole some more stuff?" Mr. Richardson handed him a piece of paper and answered, "I've listed it all here. There's nothing expensive there, but everything was given to me by my parents and has sentimental value." The policeman looked at the list and wondered. Yeah, nothing expensive, but they took it anyway. After examining the apartment, the police made a report, talked to the neighbors, and left. Now all he could do was wait for the thieves to sell everything they had stolen. But Mr. Richardson did not believe the police could catch them. The stuff they stole from him was not expensive, and all the thieves could do was sell it at the flea market. The only way to catch them was to wait for them to bring the family jewels to the pawn shop. On top of everything else, Daniel had left his pension and savings at home. The whole month was ahead, and he hadn't even had time to buy groceries. An hour later, his neighbor, Mrs. Foreman, came to see him. "Daniel, when I found out about what just happened, I headed to you. I can't believe they robbed you in broad daylight. I was only away for 2 hours. You know I'm always watching who comes into our building," the old woman said with shock. Daniel nodded and replied, "Don't worry, I don't blame you. But didn't the other tenants see anything? I don't believe it. I know many of them are staying at home all the time now, but no one went out and chased the thieves away. Everyone indifferently watched as thieves robbed my apartment. How should I survive now? They stole all the money." She looked at him, feeling sorry, but couldn't help him. Mr. Richardson sat down in a chair and said, "I'm going back to the country house. At least I have some food supplies there. I have some money left to buy bread, and then I'll figure something out." But Mrs. Foreman stopped him. "Wait. The police will be trying to find the thieves. Maybe they'll catch them, and they'll need you to identify them. What will you do if you run out of money? Are you going to walk to the city from the countryside? You won't even be able to buy a bus ticket," the woman asked. The pensioner did not think about it. Eventually, he decided to spend one day going to the country house to bring as many supplies and vegetables as possible. All day long, Mr. Richardson was cleaning up the apartment. Suddenly, he thought of his son. He thought he might ask him for help, but he immediately chased the thought away. They had recently quarreled, all because Max demanded that his father make a deed of gift to him for all his possessions. But Daniel refused, saying that he was still alive and that as soon as he felt there wasn't much time left, he would write a will. So there was no point in calling his son. The situation was difficult because he would need money for medicine in the next few days. There are no savings because he gave away almost all the money to his grandchildren. If Grandma were alive now, I wouldn't have to worry about it. She always stocked up on groceries, Daniel thought. Mrs. Foreman called Max, secretly, from Mr. Richardson, to tell him that someone robbed his father's apartment. But Max only said he was busy and would visit his father when he had time. Mrs. Foreman didn't expect that. Daniel had raised him, helped him, and now his son didn't even want to see him. Daniel cleaned up the apartment and was getting ready to go to the country house when a woman's brooch caught his eye. It was lying under the radiator. Daniel picked it up from the floor, looked at it, and thought, "That's weird. It's definitely not mine." He also wondered why the cops didn't notice it. Or maybe they didn't try to inspect his apartment and just pretended to do their job. Mr. Richardson put this brooch in his pocket so he wouldn't lose it. He spent 2 days at the country house, packing food supplies. It was good that one of his neighbors had a car and offered to drive Daniel to the city. After lunch, he arrived. Mrs. Foreman was standing outside the entrance again. "Are you waiting for me? If you want to talk, let's go inside," Daniel said. They walked into his apartment, and suddenly the woman confessed. "Please don't scold me, but I called Max. I had to tell him about the robbery, but his reaction was strange. He promised to stop by and see you, but only if he had time." Mr. Richardson looked at her and almost screamed. "Why did you do that? How did it even occur to your mind to call him? Max and I had a fight, so he definitely won't come. Well, I don't have time to talk about him. I've got some vegetables. Please, just help me cook something." The pensioner somehow managed to survive for a few days, but he needed medication. At first, he thought he would ask his acquaintances for help, but he was too shy. Everyone knew that he always saved some money just in case. No one would believe he had no money left. But what could he do? He didn't want to ask for alms. He thought that was the most humiliating of all. "I'd rather starve to death, but I'll never ask for alms," he thought. His pride tipped the scales. However, for a few more days, the pensioner somehow endured the pain, but then he had no strength left. Out of desperation, Mr. Richardson called his best friend. Fortunately, Charles was at home. "Hello, what happened? A robbery? Sure, come over, I'm waiting." His friend was shocked, and Daniel immediately went to Charles. Years ago, they had worked together, teaching carpentry. But when the carpentry club got disbanded, they both lost their jobs. But by then, they were both of retirement age, so they didn't look for another job. There were still wooden crafts in Charles's house. When Mr. Richardson saw them, he said, "I gave all my crafts to my grandchildren and friends long ago. They came in handy. It's great that you decided to keep some of them." Charles nodded and replied, "I can't forget our younger years. The carpentry club was like a second home to me. You had a wife and son, and I was alone all my life. Never got married. By the way, you said you got robbed? Did the thieves steal a lot?" Mr. Richardson sat in the chair and uttered, "They took almost all my savings. I went to the country house and left the money at home. But that's not the worst of it. They took my family heirlooms, which were very important to me, especially my mother's medallion. I rarely wore it, so I kept it in a safe place, but the thieves found it anyway. I have no idea how to get it back now." Charles brought tea and sweets and put the tray on the table. "Help yourself. If I understand correctly, you need money. To be honest, I don't have much either, but I'll help you out," said Charles, and went into the other room. And when he came back, he handed Daniel some cash, saying, "That's all I can give you. You know, I'm retired too, and I have the same expenses as you do." He thanked his friend for helping him and not leaving him in the lurch. They talked about their work together, and then Daniel said goodbye and left. On the way home, he calculated how many days he could live on that money. It was enough for a few days. However, he still needed to buy medicine, but he couldn't afford it. Suddenly, a voice whispered in his head again, "Ask people for help. They will help." But Mr. Richardson immediately chased the thought away. "No, I'm not going to do that," thought the retiree. He remembered how he and his wife had survived the difficult years. Even then, neither he nor his wife asked for alms. And now, when the situation was really bad, he could not give in to his emotions. After walking a few more steps, the pensioner stopped abruptly. A luxury car pulled up very close to him. A man wearing an expensive suit got out of that car and said hello. "Mr. Richardson, don't you recognize me? It's me, Bradley, your former student." Daniel looked closer, but still couldn't recognize him. "I'm sorry, mister, but I'm long retired and I can't remember all my students." Bradley stood for a while, scratching his head, and then he remembered. "You're the one who kept me from going to jail. You went to the police with me and talked the officer into letting me go and dismissing the case." Mr. Richardson frowned and then said, "Oh, now I remember. You got into a fight with someone. There were serious consequences, and I tried to convince the policeman to let you go. And I remember your brother. You came to visit me." The man lowered his head and said sorrowfully, "Yes, he's gone, Mr. Richardson. Let's go to the car. I'll drive you home and tell you all about my life." The retired man agreed, and they drove. Bradley told him he was now in business selling lumber. The carpentry club helped. The guy told Daniel, "You know, I was robbed recently. They stole all my savings and other things. Most importantly, the family heirlooms. The police came, but it was no use. They still haven't found anyone. I'm embarrassed to ask anyone for help, but what can I do? It's my own fault for not putting the money in the bank." "Mr. Richardson, I'll help you, especially since I owe you my life. I still have the wooden crafts you taught me to make at home. When you have time, I'll show you my house. By the way, how's Max?" the young boy asked. Daniel didn't want to talk about his son, but he answered, "He's okay. He lives with his family. We don't talk so much. So there's really nothing more to say." Bradley thought Daniel was upset by this conversation. "It sounds like you and your son don't have the best relationship. But that's none of my business. But the fact that you were robbed is terrible. Let's go to the store and then to your place for a cup of tea." After buying 2 bags of groceries at the store, they went to Daniel's apartment. Bradley didn't expect to see a half-empty apartment. "Your apartment looks so modest. It's a shame that pensioners have to survive on such a small pension. You spent more than 30 years raising ordinary kids and helping them become real men. And now you can't afford a normal life." Over a cup of tea, Bradley asked Daniel what the thieves stole and how many valuable things they took. Mr. Richardson had already said they took all the savings and family heirlooms, but suddenly, he thought about the brooch he had recently found near the radiator, pulled it out of his pocket, and gave it to Bradley. "I don't know if it helps, but I think one of the thieves lost this. I've never had a brooch like that before. I assume this brooch was lost by a woman, and if so, we must look among the female criminals," Daniel said. Bradley took a closer look at the brooch and said, "All right, I'll take it and see if I can find out anything. Honestly, Mr. Richardson, I have connections among powerful people now. I won't reveal all the details, but you'll get back everything that was stolen in a couple of days. Also, take the money. That should be enough for a while." At first, Daniel didn't want to take the money, but Bradley said he would be offended if Daniel refused to take it. Half an hour later, Bradley said goodbye and drove home. Mr. Richardson was beyond happy that he met a person who could help him. 5 days later, when Mr. Richardson wasn't expecting anyone, someone knocked on the door. He thought it was Bradley, but no. When he opened the door, there was a black envelope lying near the threshold. Looking around, Daniel didn't see anyone, then picked up the envelope and took it inside. He was surprised when he found his family heirlooms and his money at the bottom of the envelope, among other items. It turns out that Bradley wasn't lying about his connections. He really managed to find the stolen items. Years ago, Daniel kept him from going to jail. And now the grateful man punished the thieves and got almost all the stuff back. After that incident, Bradley often visited Daniel and bought him goodies. The old man was very grateful to the guy who had helped him in a difficult situation. They had long conversations over tea, and several times they even went to Daniel's country house, where they went fishing on the pond.